morning. How's everybody this morning? There you go. There you go. Welcome to the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency's 11th Annual Fair Housing Celebration. This year, our conference, titled Seniors, A Precious Resource, seeks to explore the demographics of how many seniors we have and how the built environment does or does not assist us in our daily lives. Why did I say us? Because I strongly believe that if you were made it over the age of 50, you are moving towards senior citizenship, and I'm knocking hard on the door of 60. The fact is, we as a region and as a nation have not done a good job of planning for the needs of our seniors. Whether it is housing, transportation, infrastructure, such as sidewalks, streets, and crossing signals, we have missed the mark. We have to ask hard questions, listen closely and carefully, and respond to the needs of our seniors. Questions such as, do you want to live in a nice, very affordable one-story home, or do you want to live in a retirement home or a senior citizen center? Are there services in our community that you can rely, depend on, and have immediate access to? Or must you live in a group setting to make sure that you have access to proper resources? Do you find going to church difficult? Do you have access to other people, especially younger people, who are not your doctor or your nurse, but people who live in the neighborhood that you live in and share quality of life with? Do you have to wait for a senior center bus to go grocery shopping, to go to the movies, or a night out? Do you not want to wait on a bi-state bus? Or do you not trust, or do you trust Uber, Lyft, and autonomous vehicles? Questions that need to be answered, because in the end, it all comes down to what quality of life you have and how we can better plan in a wide variety of groups to increase your quality of life. And I want to show you a few examples of what I gleaned during my Google search, and I just love Google. I think it's incredible. So, would you like to live in a senior complex such as this, or would you like to live in a house such as that? What about this choice? Or this choice? One more, this one, or this one. These are choices that can be made should our community decide, and should you all press us on the issue of where do you want to live and how do you want to live. What about infrastructure? This gentleman looks like he is far away from the other side. So why isn't there a median in the middle to accommodate people to get halfway there, possibly stop, and then get the rest of the way? But in doing that, you also have to ensure the following. You have to ensure that there are cars that are not in the median blocking the way to get to the other side. So we see handicap stickers or parking places all over the place. We also see this, expectant mothers. Why don't we see this? Or this? Accomplishes the same goal, and it further qualifies our seniors as, I am driving, I am moving about, please make it your best interest, our best interest to protect me. I don't see these much, and I don't see them enforced at all. Is this the only mode of transportation that we as a city and region and nation help provide for you and call a ride? What about autonomous vehicles, where the car, you tell it where you want to go, and it takes you there? And by the way, I happen to know that regional planning has had to put that into its conversation about transportation in the future, and that's a federal law, I believe, that's been on the books for a number of years. So depending on where you live, the regional planning effort must ensure that autonomous vehicles are part of the conversation. And now, if you know, the governor, I believe, on Monday signed the bill that grants Lyft and Uber into our communities And so we may see that as well if you trust those types of transportation options. So let's talk about integrating people into communities. I saw this picture, and I saw this picture, and I saw this picture. The interesting thing about all three, and if you Google active senior living, that's all they will show you. No integration by age into various parts of the community. This one does a great job of doing male-female. They do African American and white, but notice everybody has gray hair. To be in community, to be involved in a community means being part of whatever else is going on, whether it's going to a neighborhood meeting, whether it's going to a national night out, whether it's participating in yoga or Pilates. What we want to do is make sure that our senior community doesn't feel like the only place it can go and do things is at the Senior Citizen Center. Maybe volunteer once a week somewhere. We want to fully integrate our seniors into our communities because that makes them stronger and resilient, and also gives us their wise and sage advice on life. So those are things that we are going to explore, because in the end, it all comes down to what is your quality of life, and how you can better plan, and how we can better plan with you to increase that quality of life. Today you will hear from a variety of people who both know and understand the needs of seniors and our community. At the end of the day, there will be many more questions than answers, which means we have much work to do. With us, we will begin with a keynote and an overview of seniors in St. Louis and the city and region, and possibly national perspective, is Sheila Holm, who is with AARP. She is a community outreach director. She has over 25 years of experience in nonprofit management, with the bulk of her profession being spent with Girl Scouts of Illinois and Wisconsin. She also served as the chief operating officer for both Big Brothers Big Sisters in Prescott, Arizona, and Girl Scouts of River Bluff Council, which is in Glen Carbon. With that, Sheila Holm.
Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to spend the morning with you. As Charles said, I am with AARP. I am here in the community, so I live in St. Louis. I'm from St. Louis. It's something that AARP started about 5.5 years ago when I first started with AARP, is to really get into the community. Too many times people think about AARP as in Washington, D.C., or at the state capitol. And AARP nationally has made it a major effort to get into the community, to find out what is one of interest and need in the community, and bring it down to the local level. So that's been my mission since I started, and it's been a nice, sorry I can't see, roller coaster of fun since I started. So today I'm going to just give you a really big snapshot, I guess, of AARP, both on the local and the national level, with relation to housing and other issues that affect housing nationally, I guess. So one of the things that AARP always phrase is creating communities for people of all ages. So Charles talked about that a little earlier, where a lot of times when we think about seniors, quote unquote, we are looking at people that are 65 or 70 plus. One of the things I tell my volunteers is we don't say the S word, which is seniors. And it's because, so I'm over 50. I don't want to be called a senior later on. And so I think that, looking at a little mind shift and how we look at older adults is not as a senior per se, because I don't want to be called a senior. So anyway, creating communities for all ages is really the approach. So AARP was founded by a woman who discovered that one of her former colleagues was living in a chicken coop. She was a retired teacher. She had, this was pre-Medicare. She did have a small pension, but she had no health insurance or any other way to get income. And so she couldn't afford anything else but living in a chicken coop. And so the woman on the screen back here is Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus, the founder of ARP. She first founded the National Retired Teachers Association. And from there, people got so excited about what she was able to do for retired teachers that they wanted her to do it on behalf of other people, and so ARP was born from then. Initially, we were called Association of Retired, I don't remember what it is, American Association for Retired Persons. We're not that anymore. We're just 4 letters. We're not an acronym. So, so if you see that spread out, say, oh, no, they're just ARP now. And so one of the things that Dr. Andrus had done really early on, this picture is from 1961 with President Eisenhower. And at that point, she was already framing the work of ARP around livable concepts for older adults. So this is a home that was designed and built by ARP that employs universal design concepts. So 1961. Now we haven't gone really far. We do have some things available in the St. Louis region and beyond, but she was way ahead of her time. So one of the things that was born from the work in the livable communities is on the national level, is the ARP network of age-friendly communities. Now this is actually a component of the World Health Organization's age-friendly communities. ARP administers it on the national level in the US. And this particular program has really become the foundation of our community work in all the communities in the US. And so you'll see that there are 8 petals on this daisy, and some of them deal with the built environment, and some deal with the social environment, and then there are a couple that cross-cut between both. And so with each of these pillars, as we call them, or domains, our work is structured around that. And ultimately, should you have a good balance of these 8 things, then you should have a livable community. So again, it provides a nice framework from which to plan a community, as well as even for just programming, whether you're a nonprofit or a community-based organization, like a neighborhood association. When this first started, I guess it was back in, we had a couple cities in the nation that were first on this before ARP started working on it. Portland, Oregon, the very first. If you've been to Portland, you know how age-friendly they are as far as walkability and other issues. New York City is one of the best in the nation, believe it or not. They have an amazing age-friendly environment for the community. We're fortunate to have one right here in the St. Louis region. St. Louis County became an age-friendly community in 2013, and this is a pretty rigorous process. It's a 5-year process, 2 years planning, 3 years implementing, and you're evaluated all the way through it. St. Louis County decided to take this on, and they have done an amazing job. If you're not familiar with it, you can go to the county website and check out their age-friendly webpage or portion of the webpage there, and it will give you an overview of what they've done. The picture there, up there is of their plan. And continually people seek them out for some of the things that they've implemented as far as evaluation methods and stuff. But age-friendly can be done anywhere. It can be done in a very small community of 10,000 people, or it can be in a community of several million. So it will fit to whatever the needs are of that community. So it's a very cool program. And the great thing too is that there are a lot of people that are in the network now. When St. Louis County came in, they were number 17. We're over 100 now. So yeah, very cool, huh? Also the map up there, use all the stars. Those are all the age-friendly communities. This was probably last year, so there are even more right now. And again, in varying stages of the process. So there aren't too many counties that have taken it on. Traditionally, have been cities. So the numbers, I'm not going to do a lot on this because I think there are probably other presenters. But one of the things, you know, as Charles indicated, I have 25 years with the Girl Scouts. So I go from the Girl Scouts to ARP. Well, Big Brothers, Big Sisters in there too. So quite a leap. And for me, I did not know as much about the older population, you know, specifically in St. Louis region. And so this was really surprising to me. So we look at the 65 plus, and you know, pretty much most of the counties, they're pretty uniform, with St. Louis County being the highest one at 17% of the population being people 65 and older, with an average of 15.3%. But the figure that was even more staggering to me is the 50 plus. So, which I'm a part of. So over a third of our population are people 50 plus. You know, and when I look at our population, I do include Madison and St. Clair County in Illinois. I don't think we can talk about our region without including the Metro East. And so this is a picture of our future. As Charles had indicated, what are we doing to plan for that extra 20% that are going to be in that 65 plus, not too far down the road. And I think that is the pickle, I guess, that we're in as far as planning for our future. And the needs of and the interests of the people who are 65 and older now are different than the people who are 50 now. And so that takes a change, a shift in mindset as well. So this is an infographic that was developed as, this is part of a housing study that Harvard did that the ARP Foundation funded along with the Hartford, the insurance company. And the thing about these things, again, this is a great snapshot as far as by 2020 or 2030, 1 in 5 of the people are going to be 65 and older. I mean, it's just a tremendous number of people, and again, are we ready for them? The 2012, 1/3 of the adults age 50 and older paid more than 30% of their housing. So, you know, traditionally we're pretty house poor, and so that has an impact on, as we continue to age, can we maintain that income level required to keep that housing? The other things are the rental. So for a renter, if you're a homeowner, you can afford to have some assisted care living or other assisted services for a longer period of time because you have equity. But if you're a renter, maybe 2 months, that's it. So, and that's of course on average. So that's something that's impacting us, or will continue to impact us as well. If we don't create a community that can assist people to stay in their homes as they age, we're going to be confronted with this, with the individuals who are currently renting. They won't be able to afford that, that assisted living situation. Okay, so on this next slide, which is the other part of the infographic, this goes into the low-income renters that I was talking about. So this is 3.9 million is the individuals that are 65 plus that are eligible for housing assistance. The 1.4 are the number, 1.4 million are the ones who are getting it because there's not enough assistance, finances available. So thinking about the number of people that's going to increase, what is that going to do for the number of people that are not going to be able to get assistance for housing? So again, that's another thing. The driving, so Charles talked a little bit about that as well. And with the driving, we are getting more, but we don't have a lot of resources available for older adults. So public transit, which I know we're going to have some people talk about later on today, is great if it's available for individuals, if it's close to them. Do they feel safe? Do they know how to use it? Those things. The Uber and Lyft, that can be intimidating as well. They don't use a smartphone, so can they get access to it otherwise? So I think there are going to be additional issues while those services will be available. I think that will continue to be a challenge during this time of people who still don't use smartphones until those of us that do get into that age bracket. ARP, speaking of the self-driving or automated vehicles, ARP is doing a project with, who is it with? One of the companies. We're doing a test in Philadelphia right now with the self-driving vehicles and seeing if that is a good fit for older adults and hopefully piloting it in other areas of the country. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, but this was a survey that ARP did. 78% of people that were surveyed want to stay in their current home. The problem is that the homes are not designed to meet those needs. And we know that here in St. Louis, we have a lot of old housing stock. And so it's hard to adapt homes for when the bathroom's upstairs and you want to stay on one level. So how are you going to modify that home within reasonable means as far as financial means? So that's a situation that we are dealing with and will continue to deal with even more so. The other thing is that we know that the boomer generation wants to move in towards the city more. They want to be closer to activities, resources, or things to do, and public transit. But if we don't have a housing stock that's going to meet those needs, we're going to lose them. They'll move somewhere else where those things are available. So we do have some resources available here in St. Louis. We do have a couple organizations or entities that provide assistance on making those minor repairs or upgrades to homes. So CORE, through St. Louis County, they have a program. SLAY has a program available as well. We also have Mideast Area Agency on Aging, which has resources and information available. The Rebuilding Together, are you familiar with Rebuilding Together? So Rebuilding Together is an organization that people apply to have their home modified so that they can stay in their home safely as they age, and then they have volunteers that go in and make those modifications free of charge. It's an amazing organization. The majority of their homes that they make these modifications to are for older adults. And then the USDA, they actually have where they have grants and low-cost loans as well. There's a lot of criteria with it, but they do have that available. A lot of times people don't even think about the USDA with that. And then ARP has a resource that people can use on their own to make those modifications to their home or hire someone to make those modifications. Sometimes they don't even know what's possible, and this resource can help them. This is a free resource that's available to individuals, members or otherwise. Does not matter. Another thing that ARP has through the foundation is they have a housing solutions center through there. So you can access it through the arp.org website. Just put in foundation or housing solutions center. And then there are tools and resources that people can take advantage of for that as well, if they're concerned about having housing or keeping their current housing. 80% of the individuals, so they want to stay in their community as long as possible. But to do that, they need to have things that are accessible to them. And so, as we know, our communities were built for highways, for roads, and not built for people. And while we're making strides in that direction through Metrolink expansion, hopefully, and other resources available, we still have a problem in our community as well as others as far as people getting around. So that is something that we continue to battle. So amenities that older adults want more. The most important is transportation, bus stop. They want access to a grocery store, a green space, a pharmacy. So these are the important things. This is based upon a survey that AARP did. So again, I think that can help inform when we're doing planning in our communities. Ask what people want, not let's just pretend like we know what people want and need. And being with others. So this is really important, the socialization part, and that's one of the things that we're doing a lot in St. Louis is the socialization aspect and being active. So this group up here, there is one of my volunteers, and then there are other just ARP members or others that came on the hike. This is a hike. We do a hiking program. The volunteer that is in the blue shirt and the bandana, she's my volunteer that said, you know, I want to do hiking. Well, have you hiked before? No, I just want to do a hiking program. And so she developed that. And when she first started doing this program, we had 5 people coming. She did a hike at Babbler State Park 2 weeks ago. We had 80 people registered for that hike. So people want to be active. They want an opportunity to socialize with other people. Some of the things that people have said to us is that, you know, we want, all our friends are built around our kids, so we want friends our own age. Or my husband and I need to reconnect. This is a way we can reconnect. This is something we can do together. Or I'm new to the area and I just want to meet some people. So providing those opportunities beyond senior centers, beyond things that may make them feel aged, have things that where it encourages engagement, it encourages physical activity. We also have a cycling program, again, led by one of my volunteers. We have a cycling event on Mother's Day. Mother's Day, I don't know why she scheduled it then, but we have 50 people registered to come on that bike ride. So obviously, it's a need and an interest. And we know that socialization extends one's life. So it's important that we provide those opportunities for individuals. So this slide illustrates things that create a more livable community, whether it's walking or volunteering, that social engagement, that civic engagement, getting around without a car that we covered, cycling, crossing the street, as Charles had talked about. We do have some challenges with our crosswalks here in the St. Louis region. And again, another engagement opportunity for individuals. And I know that was really quick and slammed right through it. But I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this morning. I encourage you to check out our webpage at arp.org/St. Louis. Come to one of our events, volunteer, be a part of that 50+ movement in a different way in St. Louis. And thank you for your time.
Sheila, on behalf of the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency for the City of St. Louis, we would like to give you our house for speaking at our Fair Housing Conference in 2017.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow.
Mark Tranel from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, to talk about different demographics.
Thank you, Charles, and good morning. I will be spending a few minutes talking about a little more specific information than Sheila provided about the numbers about seniors in the St. Louis area. First of all, in terms of the big picture, you've heard a lot about the fact that the senior population is expanding, but if you look at the bars on the right side of this graph, you'll notice that they expand. These are the numbers of people over age 65 in the United States. And you'll notice in particular the last three bars, 2030, 2040, 2050, expand quite a bit, but the lowest, the darker blue part at the bottom, that's people 65 to 74, that kind of stays fairly level. The big expansion is 75 and over, and in particular, the number of people who are 85 and over is going to be expanding significantly. So there are various issues relative to the changing demographics of the older population. Specifically, demographers are having to come up with new categories. It's not just a senior population anymore. The young old are 65 to 75. They haven't even resolved exact names for the categories anymore. Sometimes the 76 to 85-year-olds are called middle old or old old. Then 85 and older is the oldest old. Well, now there are so many people that are living to be 100 and over that have got another category of the elite old or centenarians. And we're finding this is changing all kinds of things. This is Stanislav Kowalski. That number that you see on his shirt, 104, when he entered this competition, that was not a number that was randomly assigned as he checked in. That's his age. So in terms of talk about active aging, there's all kinds of things changing in society relative to housing, transportation, and other needs, but it evolves over the course of these five categories. So that's another thing we need to start thinking about when we think about the senior population. So in terms of specific numbers for the St. Louis area, to expand a little bit on what Sheila touched on, if you look at the city of St. Louis, the total population of people 55 and over is 23.6%. Compared to the metropolitan area. Now, the metropolitan area here refers to the 15-county MSA, 8 counties in Missouri and 7 in Illinois. The senior population in the metropolitan area is 27.6%. If you look at the city of St. Louis, the three categories of 55 to 59, 60 to 64, 65 to 74, the numbers in those three categories are relatively the same, ranging between about 18 and 21,000. And they represent about 10% of the seniors in the metropolitan area. So when you look at the fact that the total senior population in the metropolitan area is 9.7% of the population. And breaking it down a little bit more in terms of males and females, and when you start looking at trends, this is another thing that's changing somewhat. It's about a 60-40 ratio in the city of St. Louis of females to males compared to about 58 to 42. But with this changing over time of an increasingly older population, there has been some indication that there's going to be more of a leveling of the balance between males and females. So that's creating another dynamic in the senior population. A few more specifics about the senior population. The numbers, the percentages living in poverty. In the metropolitan area, the highest percentage of seniors living in poverty are in the city of St. Louis at 16.6%. St. Louis County is 6.3%, St. Charles County 4.6%. Relative to the interest of today's discussion about housing, for persons 65 and over living alone, in the city of St. Louis, 4 of every 10 seniors lives alone. So that creates a certain dynamic for housing needs compared to other counties in the metropolitan area where it's between 25 and 30%. The percentage of persons 65 and over with a disability, again, is highest in the city of St. Louis at 43.5%, and in the 30s in the other parts of the metropolitan area. Now, you need to stop and think about that for just a minute. In the city of St. Louis, a little over 40% of the seniors have a disability, which creates certain needs for accessibility, not just in the bathroom, in the kitchen, access to the building, but on the flip side, in terms of this issue of active aging, people who don't have disabilities, 60% of the seniors are not classified as having a disability. So in terms of people that are able to lead an active lifestyle and be integrated into the community, while there's a substantial need for addressing housing needs for persons with disabilities as they age, there's also a large component that is active and can be more competitive in the housing marketplace. A little more breakdown in terms of the percentage by race. In the city of St. Louis, just under 50% of the seniors are white compared to 47% for African Americans, and the statistics are lower for African Americans in the other counties. Missouri life expectancy at birth. For the city of St. Louis, the life expectancy at 73.2%. Again, a little bit lower for males, a little bit higher for females. And there's about a 5-year age difference between African Americans and white as far as expectancy. One of the main things I wanted to leave you with this morning relative to demographics Sheila talked about being surprised at the numbers overall, but if you look at this map of the metropolitan area, what you do see is that there is clustering of where people, and this is 65 and over, not 55 and over, where people who are in the senior category are already living. The darker blue colors are the younger population. The lighter colors, and particularly that sort of orangish, is areas where between 46 and 61% of the population is 65 and over. So in terms of addressing housing needs, transportation needs, healthcare, these other aspects, and people being interested in aging in place, we do find that there is clustering. So thinking about how to serve people where they are, we need to understand where they are and then think about how to meet those needs. And just refining that a little bit more for the city and a county, it just emphasizes, again, I think this issue of clustering and how much we need to really know and think about in detail this aspect of how aging is changing over time as more people are older and what their needs are. And when we think about this bundle of services, how do we go about delivering that where people are so that they can achieve their objective of aging in place? So that's a quick overview of demographics, but hopefully it provides a little bit more detailed understanding of this population in the St. Louis area.
So as Charles said, my name's Stephanie Herbers. I'm with the Friedman Center for Aging at Washington University. And I was given the broad topic of social impact of aging, which, as you can see from my title slide, I started having a really long list. I even sent it to Mark and Sheila via email. I was like, I have all these topics we could potentially cover and overlap, and it was getting a little overwhelming because we could talk about any of these all day long in terms of our neighborhoods and safety and engagement and working longer and economic security, and we could go on and on and on. So I'm going to try to boil it down to two main kind of points and concepts that I think about a lot, particularly given that I'm hoping I can keep us to time and keep us to around 10 to 15 minutes at the most. So I'm going to try to boil it down to kind of some thinking and points that might inform our discussion, and I think tie back into what Mark and Sheila have already talked about related to how we view aging, as well as how we can have some pretty different aging experiences throughout our life. So to start that, I'm going to require a little bit of participation. I hope you have had a little caffeine or starting to get going this morning a little bit. So this is going to be a couple questions to you, and I'm hoping at least a few of you will participate with responses. So first question, all right, so I'm requiring you to answer. When do you think we reach old age? Mark already said people are trying to deal with terms, and Sheila doesn't want to be called a senior, and we don't know when those ages start. So in the back.
5 years from now.
5 years from now? From your age now. Okay. Everyone's age. All right, all right. That's actually not an uncommon response. Anyone else? Anyone want to throw any numbers or any additional years added? 70, 80? 95? Anyone else? All right. So my other question is, how long do you want to live? So someone threw out 95. Do you want to live to 95? You want to live to 100? Longer than 100 or longer than 95? Anytime, okay. Anyone else? Anyone feel like 80 is nice? Yes, okay. We ask this question a lot. So we have a class called When I'm 64 that we do for first-year students in the university, and we ask them this question. And it's been pretty interesting to hear the variations. Some people say 65. Now, granted, they're 18 or 19, so 65 is still got a lot of life to live. Others will say 85. Some will say 100. Some will say they want to max out the lifespan, which right now is around 120. So thinking about from an 18-year-old's perspective, if they're living to 100 or 120, that's a lot of life ahead of them. So one thing that a lot of people throw out, I actually need to dig into this study more because it's quoted everywhere. I think it was based on some European data sets, but we've thrown it out at least in terms of just thinking about planning. Is half of the children born today, at least that have all the resources they could possibly have access to, can expect to live to 100. 100 years is a really long time. And right now, a lot of our policies and infrastructure is based on a more traditional life course. So where we have, thinking about from 0 to 25 or 0 to 18, we're focused on education, growing up, development, training, then a lot of work, some family time potentially, and then right now at least, supposedly, as soon as we hit 65, we're supposed to be done. We should have all the money we need, which is not normally the case, and we'll just take a vacation. But if we're thinking about even just living, if you reach the age of 65, you're pretty likely to reach age 75. If you're thinking about the children born today that potentially could reach 100, that's 35 years post 65. What are they going to be doing? We really need to be thinking about how are we setting up our expectations culturally? What are the expectations related to norms? And how does that influence our housing policies and our transportation and our communities and neighborhoods and our expectations related to work and education? Right now, there's still this norm of Not a lot of people, work past that norm, but there's still a lot of norm that all of our education should be concentrated up front. And it's really hard when you're 30 and decide, I actually know what I want to do now and I need to get some training for it, or 35 or 40 or 50. You can do it and it's doable, but it's not easy, and it feels like you're kind of out of the norm and a little bit different from the 20-year-olds that you're going into training with. So something that we really need to think about socially. So just as I said, so we're living longer, and I think there's a desire for some, if they've got it working out okay and have they're limited in terms of they don't have too many disabilities, they can get around, you want to live longer, you want to be with your friends longer, you want to be with your family longer, but our policies and structures and practices don't reflect this. When we talk about aging, it's often other people, it's not ourselves, so it's the 5 years ahead of us, it's the 10 years ahead of us, it's never ourselves. And so that kind of leads to some disconnect, and it leads to assuming that, if our demographics are changing, and it's not just the baby boomers, those demographic changes are going to be continued. We're living longer, there's more people, there's tons of millennials, whatever age range you want to consider a millennial, and their chances of potentially living a lot longer are pretty high. So there's kind of a mind shift that we need to start doing to not necessarily think that all change is negative. And that it's change to, what programs we give people access to and eligibility age criteria we set is going to be a negative experience then on the rest of us, whatever the rest of us is. One other point I try to remind myself a lot is, particularly when you're doing talks and presentations, you kind of, it's easy to talk about kind of one experience, or just the positive experiences, or just the negative experiences. As Mark had pointed out, I think in the city, one of his stats was 43% of adults are living with disabilities, but there's also another portion of adults that aren't. And so there are a lot of commonalities for aging. There are changes. It's not like everything is perfect, and we don't change in terms of how quickly we can think, process information, just physical changes. But there's also really wide variation in our aging experiences. So I try to keep in mind that age is not a disease. It's not something to change. There's no certain number where certain things happen to us. So, you could look at 5 different people that are all 65 and they could look very different. You might guess their ages are very different. But we do still have these kind of eligibility criteria that are at 50 or 65 or 62, but our experiences and our life experiences all are different. So when we reach that age, some of us might still be working a lot longer. We could be working for 5 to 10 years longer, are very active in our communities, and there's others, including potentially myself, that might need some extra assistance. And I might need that assistance starting at 63 or 62 or earlier. There's no magic age when we stop engaging in our communities and with our family and our friends. There's nothing that's going to change once you hit a certain mark. Now, you might mentally think it. I'm approaching my 40th birthday, and I'm starting to think about, even though I know that won't, the next day will not be any different, you have that mental thing in your head that makes you think that it will be. But there's not really some magic age, and we need to be careful of our assumptions that, our next door neighbor that's 80 needs certain help or needs to stop driving. Potentially. And we definitely need to plan for years of not driving when we think about transportation, but we're all kind of different. We also need to keep in mind about how much our environment and our life matters. So 75% of our health, or we could pick, there's a kind of range of percentages of numbers, of our health in later life is determined by where we live, how we live, who we live with, what happens to us throughout our lives. There is a little bit of genetics involved, but not as much as you would think. It's a lot about our communities we're living in. And we see this a lot when we look at data such as life expectancy at birth. So Mark had thrown up a had shown a slide already related to life expectancy in our region. There are some pretty huge differences, at least 15-year gaps, if not more, and we're only a few miles apart. We're not drastically large distances apart from each other. This is a map you can find in the For Sake of All report. This is not unique to St. Louis. We see it in a lot of other cities and communities. The Center on Society and Health at Virginia Commonwealth has been doing some work funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that's been looking at life expectancy at birth, and pretty large disparities in our communities related to that. So 10, 15, 20-year gaps in areas and neighborhoods that are just a couple miles apart from each other. To me, and this is one thing we talk a lot about in our classes, is that this is due to a lot of things that we can have influence on. Whether it's safe and healthy housing, how we interact across generations. There's definitely different desires related to housing. Sheila had highlighted a few. I think Charles highlighted a few in his introduction. Some people want to live in apartment communities that only have people that are their same age. Others do not. And we need to think about when we segregate by age or segregate in a lot of other ways, how that influences our experiences and our ability to live healthy lives. Our safety in our communities, accessibility, transportation, all of these things have an influence in our aging experiences, and there are also a lot of things that we can have an influence on as well, and that we've had an influence on. So just reflecting today on what Sheila has already highlighted related to age-friendly communities. There's some of the networks that are being developed in St. Louis, such as STL Village. I know Madeline is here. There's a lot of groups and organizations thinking about this. There's a lot of ways we can connect, and our people are already connecting. And we just need to rethink a little bit about how we're setting eligibility for our programs and our policies, and kind of the assumptions we make about aging and older adults. So I hope we can keep that in mind tonight, maybe discuss a little bit more as we go into the afternoon. That is all.